Ladies and gentlemen, it is lightning round tonight. We have rankings versus rankings. Myself and Andrew Cooper. Our rankings go head to head with Gary Haddow moderating. You're not going to want to miss it, so stick around. It is lightning round, and it is now. Ladies and gentlemen, it is lightning round, and I tested the cold open, and it worked. Gentlemen, how we doing this evening?
I got goosebumps after that intro, man. That's fierce. I'm like sitting here. I'm like, damn, my rankings are in trouble. You didn't give me a chance to do my intro.
You know what? Hold on. Let's do this here. All right, intro. No. Let's go.
Fantasy gamers. I muted my mic immediately, and that's the intro.
Your rankings speak for themselves. I love you.
That was a fantastic intro. I mean, it was hot, man.
It was hot. People got in there.
Gary, what was your favorite part? Was it the mic cutting out, or?
I immediately grabbed the button on my mic, and I just shut that down right away. But I think people saw in my eyes that I'm pretty serious.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was our cold open-a-thon. I think I won that, but we'll see about our rankings when me and Coop go head to head with those. But before we do, make sure you check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/lightning round. Also Spotify, Google, anywhere that you do get your podcasts. Also, we are affiliated with Underdog Fantasy, so make sure that Coop, what's the line?
Please use promo code LIGHTNING. They'll give you $25 when you sign up. I think even if you sign up for like $10, which mathematically doesn't even make sense. It's like free money. It's free real estate. So
that is true. Absolutely true. And they just unleashed the puppy drafts now. So be going into those, you get $25 if you want to use it all. Go into Best Ball Mania. We'll be in those streets. As we're starting to get into more draft season as the summer progresses. But gentlemen, let's get our rankings in. And Gary, I'm gonna give you the floor, my friend.
Let's do it. So we decided we're in the dregs of the off season. What better time than to jump into our rankings? And since Coop and Kevin both do theirs and I do not and defer to theirs, it seemed like a perfect time for me to take us through these. So today we're going to be doing wide receivers and tight ends. We're going to focus on the pass catchers and kind of go from there. So we're going to start off with wide receivers. I had both Kevin and Coop pull their top 36 wide receivers, review them, fine-tune them, send them over to me, and we're going to dive in here. So I got to admit, biggest thing that jumped out to me. So I didn't realize that Calvin Ridley is just this polarizing player within the fantasy football community. Did my research. Turns out he's not. However, in these rankings, we have Kevin with wide receiver 5, Calvin Ridley. That makes sense. And then there's Coop, who has Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 13. So, Coop, tell us, how are you so significantly lower on Calvin Ridley than the rest of the entire community?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's easy for me. First, I got to preface this by saying that my rankings, I don't submit them to, Fantasy Pros, anything like that. They're behind a paywall, and they're part of a very specific strategy that I use, which has worked for me for a long time. And basically the idea is extreme risk aversion in the early rounds and then taking super high end risks as soon as the middle rounds, right? So for me, I look for guys in the very beginning rounds that are super steady, super stable. A lot of the times I end up taking running backs. So if you are familiar with the philosophy that I have in my overall rankings, you'll see that basically I have all running backs and then 4 wide receivers, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyreek Hill, that I believe are time-tested as essentially number 1 wide receivers that have faced top coverage and, in the same system that they're in right now that they were last year. And they'll be, and they've, even guys like DeAndre Hopkins have had anyone at quarterback. Like if Kyler Murray gets hurt, DeAndre Hopkins is still probably gonna be pretty good. You know what I mean? So it's those guys that I'm looking for in the early rounds. And when it comes to guys like Calvin Ridley or even Justin Jefferson, when I go through and I look at last year, I look at the game logs, I look at the scenarios, there's situations where, Calvin Ridley was alongside Julio Jones. He wasn't facing Marshawn Lattimore. He wasn't facing Carlton Davis. In the game where he faced Jair Alexander when Julio Jones was out, he had 5 targets and 0 catches. So to me, just because I've never seen him in that full first wide receiver chair, and there's also not really a second wide receiver. If Kyle Pitts doesn't take a big step forward, playing a lot of split end, playing a lot of slot, drawing a lot of coverage, he could be heavily double teamed. And you know what? Calvin Ridley very well could be amazing. He could be the best wide receiver in the league. You know what I mean? If he responds to that adversity well. But for me, I just avoid the catastrophic risks in the early rounds. So I can't rank him at 5, right? So when I look at that situation and say, okay, he's going to face Carlton Davis twice this year. He's going to face Marshawn Lattimore twice this year. He's going to face Trey White in championship week of fantasy football. Like if he doesn't respond well to those situations in the early going, it gets kind of scary. So, and it's just one guy. So that's why for me, I just have him ranked at a position where I'll never get him. And that's fine with me.
It's a lot, Kevin.
He's good. I like him.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I wish I could be that easy. No, you know what? Calvin really made a big step up. And to Coop's point, you could also say to how much higher is there really to go after Ridley broke out last year? I mean, you could certainly make that case right now. Julio Jones is gone. Incoming is Kyle Pitts. Right now their wide receiver outside of Ridley, or it's Olamide Zaccheaus, Russell Gage. I mean, what are they going to really be pulling? So, you have to figure, Kyle Pitts may play split end. That was my prediction if you're dealing Julio Jones, I mean, that's probably the most logical step to make, because are you really going to put, slender Calvin Ridley on the line? Are you really going to put Zaccheaus at 5'4" on the line? I mean, Russell Gage, you're not tethering those guys to the line, so I think Ridley is a stretch there, because I think with his frame, he can be bullied a little bit. So it's tough, and I can understand that, but I still think Calvin Ridley he wins out in the end with volume and his skill, and there is something to be said about Calvin Ridley when Julio was not there. Matt Ryan certainly had a tougher time getting the ball to him, but I still really like him just as a big time volume play. I don't think the Falcons offense really drops off that much. I think it's going to get a little more efficient, with Arthur Smith at head coach. So, I do still really like Calvin Ridley. I think he's square in the mix, of a lot of those guys that we talked about with AJ Brown, with Justin Jefferson, those guys in hyper condensed offenses. I think Calvin Ridley is in lockstep with those guys, and as a player, it's very close, and you can make a case for any of those three in any order.
Yeah, and one thing that wasn't added, I believe he had an ankle cleanup, and I don't think that's that big of a deal, but it just, for some reason, Calvin Ridley in my head is somebody that I'm worried about as being an injury risk, even though that I actually don't. It's not that he's missed a games. He's just seems to have been banged up frequently. So he tends to be somebody that I pass on. Also, I mean, wide receiver 13, especially for obviously the show's purposes, like feels kind of hefty, but when you're in a tier like wide receiver 5 to 8, I can definitely see that. And I mean, I actually don't think I've taken him, I think, once in an entire draft, and that was in an FCE. So I do see it. The upside feels like it could be there to be wide receiver 1, but there's a bunch of other guys that can do it, and I feel more locked and voted on. So I get it, and I appreciate the strategy, though, the extreme risk aversion and early on. That's pretty fantastic.
And with guys like that, it's like the reality of it is that were I to rank him at 8 or 9, I wouldn't get him anyway. You know what I mean? So basically what I do with my rankings is I show you the guys that I trust, right? So it's not even necessarily, like I said, I'm not trying to win the Fantasy Pros award for accuracy rankings, because my rankings are never set up like that. You'll see with my tight end rankings too, where I'm not trying to pick the tight end that's 10 and he's going to finish 10, because if I have the tight end 10 as my starting tight end, then I've failed. You know what I mean? So for me, I'm always going to have high end tight ends and the guys who I believe could either be high end or they could be terrible. You know what I mean? But so it's kind of a, you know, it's a strategy thing that lends the rankings to be that way. But if I had to like try and pin the needle on where I think Calvin Ridley is going to finish, I think he probably, you know, somewhere. That's the thing, is it's the fluctuation of where he could finish on the high end versus the low end. You know, like I think he probably will finish top 10, but I think there are guys that are a lot safer to finish top 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and those are the guys I want. So that's kind of the way my rankings work. You know.
Yeah.
Would, you know, with you being lower on him, or Kevin, and you're so high on him, I mean, to think that the passing volume is going to be there just for the overall offense, is Russell Gage somebody that does intrigue both of you?
I'm kind of iffy on Russell Gage. You know, it was very hard. You know, he had some relevant weeks, you know, when Julio was hurt, but I just don't know if I can really trust him as an option. You know, certainly being able to plug him in your lineup and rostering him are two different animals. So I really, and then we're looking to, if Kyle Pitts is going to be off the line, Hayden Hurst is going to be commanding some targets too. And there's ranges of outcomes where Hayden Hurst could potentially be the next target after Ridley, or even Mike Davis. You know, there's still a lot of weapons there in Atlanta, even though Julio's not there. So Russell Gage kind of just falls into that glut of guys where it could be anybody. So, and his ADP has kind of gone up with that Julio trade too. So, you know, if I'm not going to take him in like the wide receiver 40 range where I could get a LaVisca Chenault, or where I could get guys that I feel like have way higher upside than Russell Gage. I mean, your bet on Russell Gage is that this offense is strong enough to be able to support, you know, Pitts, Ridley, Mike Davis, and you're hoping Gage can fit in there. I'm just not sure that's a bet I want to make at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly it for me. Like that last part that you said is exactly where I'm at, because so I did the snap counts last year for the weekly snap counts for Fantasy Alarm. And what I did notice was that when Julio was out, Russell Gage's position did change. So he was averaging 40 snaps a week in the slot. When Julio was out, the first game he was out, he played 31 snaps out wide. So they did, move Ridley to split end, which, as Kev alluded to, he's not a good choice at split end, right? He's just not a big guy. You don't want him to face that the jam, right? There is a world where they use 2 tight end sets, right, with Hurst and Pitts, and Pitts is either out wide at split end or inside, and that lets Ridley and Gage both be untethered from the line, where they can go in motion. They have that space where they can't get jammed, and if Matt Ryan throws 684 passes the way he did in 2019, maybe you could support 3 guys, right? Yeah. But notice how many times I said "and" there. Once you start saying "and" the third or fourth time, you get into that, you know. But I mean, if you look at once you get into that range of the draft where it's like things are getting so dicey anyway that you're already talking about guys that are guaranteed to be the third target on the team, it's not too crazy to say, you know, Russell Gage might be playing flanker, and Kyle Pitts is a rookie, you know, so, worth a dart though at the right price.
So going back to a different thing that you said, that you put guys in your rankings, particularly to emphasize the trust you have in them. And so this will be another question for Coop. You have Allen Robinson at wide receiver 5. And it's so weird seeing it, because I don't know if anybody even would disagree seeing that, because they're like, well, it's Allen Robinson. But that still is, you know, he's going about, the 10, 11 spot right now, if not closer to the 12, 13. So why are you so high on him? Explain that ranking.
So I think if you go through the rankings the way they are, right, I have the 4 guys that I trust the most, which were, again, Adams, Diggs, Hopkins, Hill. After that, I'm looking for a guy who's been a number 1 target in this league, who's been pretty much quarterback proof. And I mean, Allen Robinson is that guy. And we consider, I mean, if you look at Trubisky, he's a backup now. We consider Dalton and Fields, they're both upgrades at quarterback. So for me, Allen Robinson is about as safe as it gets. And when you go down that list, it's guys like that where it's like DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen. Like, these are guys that we just saw them in this role last year, in this offense last year, with these same quarterbacks to a certain degree. I mean, not Robinson, but he's getting an upgrade at quarterback, right? So it's like, for me, Robinson is as safe as it gets. You know, same thing with like Mike Evans, who I am probably higher on than most people. You know, whereas I'm lower than a lot of people on guys like Justin Jefferson and Calvin Ridley, just because I'm, you know, there's that potential for the sophomore slump type situation where things change and now defenses are adjusting to them as the focal point of the offense, you know? Like Al Robinson's always been the focal point of the offense. You know, it's like you can't make it any harder on the guy.
Yeah, I see it. And I mean, so Kevin, you have him at wide receiver 11, and I may have asked this last week, but well, just in case, you know, do your rankings shift if you knew it was Dalton for 16 or Fields for 16? Because there's logic to both being positives and or negatives.
Yeah, there's logic to both. And on the podathon, actually, FTN's Elliot Christ put out they're adding a bunch of new stats and metrics and tools on FTN. And one of those is first read percentage. Last year, Mitchell Trubisky threw to his first read at the highest percentage of the NFL last year. Who would you guess was number 2?
Dalton.
Andy Dalton. That's correct. So that's just something to think about when you're looking at Allen Robinson, who's going to be the first read on, you know, umpteen, you know, targets for the Chicago Bears. So even if, you know, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace decide to bungle this with starting Andy Dalton in way too many games, I'm not at all worried about Allen Robinson. And, you know, his stock only goes up as Justin Fields gets there, gets his feet wet, and, you know, starts to gain, you know, rapport in that offense. So I think he's a locked in top 12 wide receiver. Absolutely. Yeah, not much more to say. I mean, like,
oh yeah,
we were worried about, you know, Allen Robinson coming off of that injury. It seems like it was just yesterday, but it was 4 years ago, that ACL, and then he, you know, went to Chicago, and he had that. The first year was kind of him getting back in the swing of things, but he's just been a surefire stud, and, you know, I can't see that, you know, going away anytime soon.
I feel like hashtag free Aaron Jones was a thing for so long, but the predecessor was free AR-15. Like, and finally, Justin Fields is the first time he's going to have a real NFL quarterback. I've had a man crush on him since he put up his 14 touchdowns with Blake Bortles back the year prior to the ACL. I mean, the dude is just a total stud. He's amazing. So I have no issue with however high anybody would take him. And I think that the logic that Coop made, and also Kevin, but the logic of he's behind just this group is like spot on. So.
Right. And I'll go as far as say, like, the logic with all these guys is that, and this is kind of, you know, almost an anti-fantasy community analyst take, but like, if you look at the top wide receivers that are drafted each year, like, they're usually pretty good. Like, my philosophy is, if the running backs that I want aren't there, then I just take a wide receiver. I mean, like, who did you really miss on last year in ADP? You missed on DJ Moore because they had a brand new coach and a brand new quarterback, and everything was completely changed. You know what I mean? Like, beyond that, the guys that were drafted at the beginning of drafts were pretty good, you know, for the most part. Yeah. You know, Odell Beckham got hurt. You know,
Galladay.
Galladay got hurt, but it's like, for the most part, last year was like, you know, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins. Like, these guys were pretty good for the most part. And, you know, that's kind of like, I'm looking to find the new guys later. In the early parts, I'm just trying to pick the safest possible core because I trust my ability to find guys later, you know? So that's kind of my philosophy on, don't screw it up by picking the out of the box pick. Just pick the guy that's the safest possible, you know?
Yeah. You sound like me right now. You really do.
Maybe that's why we're on a podcast together, brother.
Oh boy. Look at that.
All right, so a team we haven't talked about a ton, and I think it's just because they're so damn good, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and specifically their pass catchers. You know, while it's not a massive difference, I do want to have the conversation, and that's, you know, you both see a different pass catcher there being the top wide receiver. Kevin, you have Chris Godwin at wide receiver 16, Evans at 18, so it's very close. Whereas Coop, you have Evans at 12 and Godwin at 18. So, Kevin, I want to throw this one to you. What makes you want to have Godwin above Evans, even if they clearly are probably in a tier together or something like that?
I mean, they're very close together, and it would not surprise me to see Mike Evans be over Chris Godwin when all is said and done in 2021. But I look at the late season surge that Godwin had with Tom Brady. 4 touchdowns, just hyper targeted. I mean, that sort of thing. I mean, Mike Evans has just a rock solid, consistent. There's something to be said for a guy that has 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and it's just a fantasy force every single season. I mean, that's the thing is people, they don't see a lot. They see a flat curve. They don't see, that kind of consistency and, just take it for what it is. They want to have the shiny new toy. They want to have those CeeDee Lamb shares and take them around ahead of a guy like Mike Evans. But I think Chris Godwin has just a little bit more, oomph with him, I guess, for lack of a better term. I think he has a higher target, potential. I think he has a higher yards potential. If we're looking to kind of stat that out with fantasy football, I think that he's not a deep threat. He's, over the middle, intermediate kind of guy. And I think that's going to mesh more with what Tom Brady can do at age 43 than Mike Evans, though. Both are going to get theirs. Mike Evans is going to get his. I think Chris Godwin is just a smidge more attractive to me from a fantasy point of view.
Coop, you're muted.
You are muted, my friend.
It's a plague today.
You know what's funny about that is I agree with everything that Kev just said in terms of that situation. The only thing, like, I could sum it up pretty easily just by saying if Antonio Brown wasn't there, I would rank him the same exact way that Kevin does. And the reason, the problem that I run into, right, for me is that we know that Mike Evans at 6'5", 200, yeah, there you go. We know that at 6'5", 230 pounds, Mike Evans is going to be out there on pretty much every snap, and he's definitely going to be out there in the red zone, right? When you bring on another tight end, which the Buccaneers have 3. They don't use a fullback, but they have 3 tight ends. They have obviously Gronk, O.J. Howard, and Cameron Brate. If they want to go 2 tight ends, that means 1 wide receiver comes off the field, right? And you look at Antonio Brown and his connection with Tom Brady, and they basically sort of averaged a touchdown per game to end the year there. All they care about is winning games over there. They don't care about stats. No. They don't care about, so if they say, in 2 tight end sets in the red zone, it's Evans and Antonio Brown, that's just a little bit less that Godwin's out there. If Antonio Brown was gone, if he wasn't there, if he gets arrested again for the 85th time for something, something that we would be surprised by and also simultaneously not surprised by at all, then I would immediately move Godwin ahead of Evans, because if it was super consolidated between the 2 guys, obviously, if, like you said, a 43-year-old Brady isn't chucking it downfield or chucking it up, but for me, just the fact that I can be safe in knowing that Mike Evans is going to be out there pretty much every single snap, that I just have him ahead, but again, that's a risk aversion thing on my part.
And it makes total sense. It does. I can't figure out what Antonio Brown does to this offense if it unlocks. Evans just had the most outlier season, right? I mean, he had 2 games where he had a 1 for 2 and a touchdown, a 2 for 2 and 2 touchdowns. That being said, even without those games, he still scored 10 touchdowns.
That's a Jerome Bettis line.
Was over 1,000 yards because those were 3 yards and he got to 1,006. So it's super confusing to me. I'm going to jump down to a different question because I really want to hear the answers to a different one, but I'm being summoned by my 4-year-old who is screaming. So Cooper Kupp feels like a screaming value. We've seen what he's done in the past. I think he finished as wide receiver 3 or 5, and that was in 2019, I believe. We all love Robert Woods. He's going as wide receiver 15, but then we have Kupp back closer to wide receiver 24. This didn't shatter, but I just dropped it on the ground. That's great. I don't understand how Kupp is so far behind compared to Woods, considering what we've seen, Matthew Stafford do with some of the bigger bodied wide receivers. And they are very different. A bigger body is probably even a bad moniker for him, but help me understand what I'm missing here. I'll be right back in 30 seconds, but keep talking. Coop.
I'll jump on that. Yeah. So I mean, just for me, Cooper Cup, the style of game that he plays, which is a fairly low A dot role, he plays in the slot and 3 wide receiver sets. So what they clearly want to do is get back to what they were doing with Brandon Cooks, which is you have Robert Woods, who's an amazing blocker. He's always out there as you can play split end, you can play flanker, you can play slot. He plays it all. And then what they do is when they go 3 wide, they bring in a field stretcher, which is going to be Deshaun Jackson. If he falls apart, it'll be Tutu Atwell, right? So you have basically you have Woods on one side, Atwell on the other side, Deshaun Jackson on the other side, and then Cup in the slot. And then in 2 wide receiver sets, he moves to flanker. For me, that like low A dot role, even if they get equal targets between the two, then then Robert Woods is going to be the better fantasy player just based on average depth of target alone for that role that he's playing. And that's what pushes him ahead. And I think, Kev, I'm pretty sure you feel fairly similar on that situation, no?
Yeah, I mean, the difference between Goff and Stafford is night and day, and that's going to benefit someone like Robert Woods way more than a guy, versus Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp, when we saw 2018 was the wide receiver 1, when that McVay offense was just absolutely rolling with those 3 guys that you mentioned, Cooks, Kupp, and Woods. I just don't see it. That kind of role translating into anything more than he could be a solid wide receiver too. I just don't really see the upside, into where we saw him even 2-3 years ago, whereas he could be that wide receiver 1 and just be absolutely hyper targeted. We saw those games of double-digit receptions. I just don't see that anymore with Cooper Kupp. Now, could that that offense could absolutely support him? Can if maybe Stafford can, see a little bit of that Golden Tate connection that he had in the slot, with Detroit, that could certainly be possible too. But, Robert Woods is the guy I want for the types of targets he gets downfield. That's kind of like that, the Brandon Ayuk thing when we talk about with San Francisco, where, we look at Deebo Samuel, we know the types of targets that he gets, is that really conducive to fantasy versus Brandon Ayuk, we know he can win with talent, as an X receiver. We know he can do that. So, give me Robert Woods, especially over Kupp. But I think Kupp is very useful, and I think maybe his ADP is a little bit too depressed. He could certainly be a value there if you're taking guys, like a DJ Chark, like a Kenny Galladay, has his own depressed ADP issues.
Yeah, and I just think back to the one game that I always think back to was the 2019 when they played the Cowboys, and the Rams were just getting crushed, and the Cowboys zone, they were basically just hanging back, playing the zone, and Goff was just feeding it underneath to Higbee and feeding it underneath to Cooper Kupp, and basically it would be like 3rd and 15, and he would just throw like a 5-yard pass to Cooper Kupp or like Higbee, and that's great for fantasy. You know what I mean? 10 targets or whatever in a game where you're losing by 30 points, but Stafford's just not that kind of guy. Like in the year that's a year ago, Stafford, when he got hurt mid-season, he threw more 20-plus yard passes that season than Jimmy Garoppolo did in a full season. You know what I mean? Like, he's a gunslinger. So I think that like you said, the deep guys benefit, and Cooper Kupp's going to be fine. It's just it's not even that I'm moving Cooper Kupp down. It's that I move Robert Woods way up from where I normally would have him.
I love to hear it. I think this secretly was a Robert Woods question, just to make me feel really good about the fact I recently traded for him.
We keep this brand rolling, man.
We do. Right. I just love him. So switching from the stud passing offenses that I think the Rams will be, that we know that the Bucs are going to be, and let's go to the lowly Denver Broncos, who I say lowly, but they feel like this ascending team that is one piece away. I actually think that they are a Super Bowl caliber team. They are just one piece away, and that is the quarterback, and I actually believe that. And I have no idea what the hell to do with Courtland Sutton. He tore his ACL week 2 after missing week 1 with a shoulder injury, so we only have that one game. But I think he had 9 targets, 6 targets, 3 receptions for 66 yards, which isn't crazy, but it was against the Steelers, and we know what the Steelers defense to start off last year was just lights out. But then in 2019, it was his sophomore season, 125 targets, 72 receptions, over 1,000 yards, over 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, talk about being primed for a breakout. The stars seem to align. Sans, Drew Luck, and Teddy Bridgewater. Maybe that's something that's unable to move past, but you both are pretty close. So Kevin, wide receiver 26, Coop, wide receiver 21, right on that border of wide receiver 2. So what do you guys do with him? So Kevin, I'm going to put this one up to you first. Like, is he a target for you, or is he someone that just you statted everything out, he landed there, and you're just not somebody you're really going to touch?
Oh no, I'll target him more, whenever I can. That's a guy that just because he played week 2, he was out for week 1 and then he got hurt week 2. And he just falls out of people's, collective consciousness. And I don't know what it is, but Cortland Sutton always seems to fall into that DJ Chark, that T Higgins kind of, we saw him break out. We saw him break out with Joe Flacco and Drew Lock. I mean, I would venture to say that, Teddy Bridgewater, granted his deep ball aversion, would be an upgrade at least at this stage, over those two guys. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that Cortland Sutton should be able to lead that team in targets, and it's going to be a very, it's going to be a battle between him, and then we'll talk about Jerry Jeudy as well, and then Noah Fant, Javonte, we'll see who else gets targets in that offense. But I think Cortland Sutton is a guy that they've been itching to get back, and it was really a hard luck injury that he had, in game 2 last year. But a report came out actually today that he should be ready for week 1. So I'm perfectly fine with Cortland Sutton in that range, and that's a guy that you're getting at a value, and that's a guy that could return borderline, wide receiver 1 numbers.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is that, like, with this offense, you have to make a decision, right? You have to decide nearly I've beat this to death on this podcast, every podcast, but essentially most teams can support 2 pass catching targets at most. You know what I mean? And especially when your quarterback is Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater. So for me, I'm fading Fant a little bit, and I like Sutton and Jeudy, and I like them at their ADP. It's just, again, with the uncertainty of a potential, Drew Lock not being great and there potentially being a QB change, it's scary. But I mean, we've already seen and obviously the knee injury. If it wasn't for the knee injury, I think, like Kev said, he probably would have had a great season last year, and we'd have him higher. But it's like,
look what he did. Look what they did with Tim Patrick as basically the Cortland Sutton in that offense. Yeah. I mean, we saw Tim Patrick have relevancy throughout the year. Imagine that if that was Cortland Sutton, we'd be taking him, in the 3rd round this year.
Right. So it's like, that's why I love the value there, and that's again part of my strategy of basically saying, look, take these 4 guys that are lock studs if you get them. And then that whole next section I'm kind of fading. And then after that is where the guys like Mike Evans, Adam Thielen, Tyler Lockett, where I know they're going to be out there every snap. They're going to have a decent target share. Like, I go for those guys. This grouping here is another group where I'm like, this is where you grab your wide receiver 2, because you could be grabbing a wide receiver 1. You know what I mean? Like Sutton, I just don't see a world where Jeudy and Fant each get 100 targets and Sutton doesn't. It's almost like where's the world where Sutton isn't good? Unless he has like a compensation injury from the knee injury,
In a world where Cortland Sutton isn't good.
Flick the lights.
Oh, man.
I mean, I love it. I completely agree. I can't even tell if I was biased in throwing this in here because I just took Cortland Sutton as my wide receiver 5 in Scott Fishbowl. But I don't know. It's a very confusing thing. I feel like even going into 2019, Sutton was like the hot wide receiver in dynasty keeper leagues that he was just going to explode. And like you guys said, like the injury makes people forget, and his situation didn't even get worse. I forgot about the Joe Flacco experiment in Denver, and that makes me even more excited about these pass catchers.
Yeah, and if you think Cortland Sutton's not going to be the top target in Denver,
stop it. Get some help.
It was like,
I finally uploaded it.
Finally, let's go.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So I want to continue on then with actually the wide receiver 2 in Denver. I feel like this is a perfect time to talk about Jerry Jeudy and Odell Beckham. They are players that are at polar opposite ends of their career with these massive upsides at various points, what we thought was going to happen with Jeudy and what we still continue to hope might happen with Odell. So we'll start with Jeudy, continuing with the Broncos pass catchers. So Coop, you don't even have Jeudy as like a top 36 wide receiver. And I feel like from everything that you have just said that you're fading Fant a little bit, that you really believe like who's going to be that second player on the field. And yet in an offense that we expect to still pass somewhat, you don't even have him there as a wide receiver 3. I mean, Kevin has him at wide receiver 32, like modest. That's good. It's nothing crazy, but and hey, maybe you have him at wide receiver 37, Coop, but I feel like I have to ask because the upside and the talent for Jeudy was just insane in college. We expected a ton when he came out. The videos, if you watch off-season hype videos, Jeudy's videos are like the sickest to watch. His route running is just insane.
Right. And, we saw a rookie. We did see an amazing show from a rookie. Justin Jefferson came out. He had like 1,400 yards. Wasn't that awesome? It was crazy.
Yeah. He remember when he was just a slot guy?
Right. Supposedly just slot guy. He got 100 and change targets and had a ton of yards. And then Jerry Jeudy got 100 and change targets as the top wide receiver, and he had like 850 yards. I think he caught like 50% of his passes. So I mean, I don't know why people are super excited about him moving down to the second target on the team now. It's like there's also the risk that what happens is Cortland Sutton is the top target on the team, and the targets are fairly flat between the rest of the guys, between 2 running backs and the slot guy and the tight end, and they're also not quality targets. So for me, there's a bunch of guys that could lead their team in targets that have done it a bunch that I'm just taking first. It's like Jerry Jeudy is. I mean, what's the difference between what Jerry Jeudy gives you and what Tyler Boyd gives you, or Jarvis Landry? I mean, why would you take Jerry Jeudy over Jarvis Landry? Jarvis Landry is another slot guy that's been successful in this league. He's got a ton of targets. He's got a ton of yards. He had a better year last year than Jerry Jeudy did, 3 touchdowns or whatever. So why even take that risk and draft him at his ADP, which is pretty high, when you could just take another slot guy? I mean, it's like not every guy that gets drafted high in the NFL is drafted to be a super mega star split end. Most years the best wide receiver does end up being like a slot guy that's pretty good. And I think he will be a slot guy that's pretty good. And if you're looking for just like okay wide receivers, then I would definitely take Jerry Jeudy.
Ooh.
I mean, so I put in the show doc and I forgot to drop it there. So per FTN fantasy, the air yards stat. So air yards being the distance that ball travels in the air, right, per pass accumulated over the course of the season. I mean, it's Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, Tyreek Hill, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Allen Robinson, Chase Claypool, Justin Jefferson. Like, I mean, that is a pretty damn elite group that tends to be a pretty good predictive stat for success. If you're talking about Drew Lock, which I think we all kind of scoff at Drew Lock as being a starting caliber NFL quarterback, right? Like,
remember last year when I was talking him up, Gary? That was a fun month.
I mean, he had his game. He had that game, right? He threw like 4 touchdowns that game.
Dude, he was YOLO all season.
Totally.
Like, if you look up YOLO in the dictionary, it's Drew Lock's picture.
Right.
Like, I do get like the terrible catch percentage, but there is something there for him. And is there a world where he is just in the NFL a lights out wide receiver too, and he maybe just needs an alpha with him? That I don't even know if we can make an assessment at this point without a real quarterback.
I think he got all those 8 yards because he was playing a role that he wasn't supposed to be playing because the real stud wide receiver got hurt, and there was a lot of air yards before the ball hit the ground. You know what I mean? Like, what do air yards mean when you have a 46% catch rate? You know what I mean? Like, if he's not
air yards or monopoly money, basically.
Right. It's like there's no reason to throw him those passes again now that you have Sutton, who actually has a history of catching them. Sutton had a 70% catch rate. In his 2019 season, Jeudy had 53% or whatever. I mean, it's like, why wouldn't they just go to the guy who they know can catch it?
Judy's air yards are really just a Sutton promo stat.
Yeah. If Judy can cash in those air yards, yeah, he can't cash in those air yards and like go by Park Place. Like that ain't gonna be happening anytime soon. But maybe the best thing for Jerry Jeudy is hoping that Teddy Bridgewater gets that job, because that him at quarterback is much more conducive to an elite route runner than Drew Lock is. I mean, Drew Lock is probably the best chance for, I would say, for Cortland Sutton. I think Teddy Bridgewater is good for both, but I think that Lock and Jerry Jeudy may not be just a good fit. It just may be the case, but I think there's something there with Jerry Jeudy being kind of miscast last year in a weird situation with, like you said, Coop Sutton was out by week 2. And then we had the KJ Hamler stuff. We had, Noah Fant. We had just an offense that was just kind of in disarray. So like I said, I'm really hoping that Teddy Bridgewater can be good for Jerry Jeudy. I think that he can be. And at that ADP that he's going at, that's not a bad price to be able to pay for somebody who was just taken in the top, 15 last year, in year 2, he got the targets. Everybody's favorite buzzword in fantasy Twitter is regression. It's regression is coming. We know Adam Thielen, he caught way too many touchdowns last season, so got to bring him down. I went off a tangent. I'm sorry.
I just imagine Drew Lock every time coming back to the huddle after Jeudy dropped one or missed one of those passes, and just being like, dude, every single time you make that leg drop move, and I'm like, oh shit, where did he go? I was following the DB. I had to throw it, and I'm sorry, man, but god damn, that move is good. I just don't know how to figure it out.
All right. Yeah, he does have that he's got like knees.
The leg drop is nuts.
Inexplicable knees, But
if somebody can find a conversion chart somewhere to cash in air yards to fantasy points, I would be more than happy to, I want to take a look at that.
Yeah. I will say Kev is right that if they were to say Teddy Bridgewater would be the QB week 1, then I would definitely move Jerry Jeudy up. I mean, I wrote about it last year in the DJ Moore article I did on why he was struggling, and it was basically because Teddy Bridgewater has an aversion to throwing the ball deep. He was bottom of the league when I wrote the article. I think it was like week 9 or 10. He was bottom of the league in passes over 20 yards, and the crazy thing is his percentage on those passes wasn't even bad. Like, it was almost like he was only throwing them if it was wide open. And the beneficiaries were really Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel. And I think, just like Kev said, Teddy Bridgewater would be perfect for Jerry Jeudy because those are the routes he likes throwing. So,
So then moving on to old man time, and that's Odell Beckham Jr. He feels like he's like 37, but he's not. Coop has him at wide receiver 23, squarely a wide receiver 2 back end. But Kevin, he's outside your top 36. I know that we kind of talked about it on the previous episode with Andrew Hall, but what are your concerns with Beckham? And don't you see a world in which he opens up this offense that allows him to benefit and not just the Browns?
In a world where Odell Beckham finishes as a top 24 wide receiver is a world that we were not going to be living in ever. Not even if there's a fire. I'm sorry. I'm completely out on Odell Beckham. The only exposure I have to Odell Beckham is when I've been working in an underdog and I'm on the clock and I time out. Those are the only 2 exposures I have to Odell Beckham. And that is a true story because that happened today. One of them happened today. That's true. Yeah, it is a power move, Coop. I agree. But yeah, Odell Beckham, I mean, he's 28 years old right now. We probably have seen the best of Odell Beckham, and it is not in Cleveland. It is not in a low passing volume offense. The days of him getting 158 targets, 169 targets, those days are over. He got 133 targets in his first year and barely caught half of them. Last year he was averaging less than six targets per game, not even that. So I'd rather have Jarvis Landry than Odell Beckham. I would rather have, in that passing offense. I mean, in this economy.
How did I know you were going to say it? I just think that there's a world in which that he's going to provide a little bit more than we expect. That often.
Stop it. Get some help.
Fucking hate you. Moving on to
the
tight ends.
No. Before we move on to that,
I'm sorry.
I have Odell high, and I think we've seen him be elite on this team in this very offense. Like if you look at any of the track, any of the workout stuff he's doing, he's right back on track. These injuries aren't a death sentence, and like you usually know when it's happening. Like when Marquise Lee got badly hurt, and they were like, "Oh, Marquise Lee isn't going to be ready," and then you kind of hear the news that it's like nerve damage, all this stuff. None of that's happening with Odell. He's already out there running around. You're seeing him you're seeing the videos, you're seeing everything you usually see from these guys that come back, and he is in the top chair in this offense. He's now been with Baker Mayfield for 2 years. Teams know what the deal is in terms of what they want to do in the run. So there's going to be a lot of selling out to stop that. And I think that Odell is, again, one of the safer guys. When you get into this territory, all you're really looking for is a guy that could be your wide receiver 2 or 3. And Odell Beckham Jr., like even in his worst year, with his first year with the Browns, with a young Baker Mayfield, had 1,000 yards. So I think, you know, if he's playing and he's healthy and he's the top wide receiver on this team, which he obviously is, then it's just an easy pick to say, oh yeah, I'll just take Odell Beckham Jr. and I'll take 900 to 1,000 yards and he'll be in my lineup every single week.
And is there something to be said though about an ACL injury this late, you know, at age 28, you know, coming off that? That's a concern for me too. If the dude was 24, 25, I think I'd have less concerns about that. But just knowing that with everything that he's gone through, you know, baggage wise, you know, going over to Cleveland, adding that into the fact that the offensive ecosystem there, you know, they're pretty much split as far as run pass, you know, and that's going to be probably a top 5 rushing, you know, volume, you know, in that offense. I just don't see the upside, but I understand.
He's 28 years old, man. Like Jerry Rice tore his ACL when he was 34, back when they used to just rub dirt on it and say, "Why don't you take a little breather?" You know what I mean? And he came back and he had a bunch of 1,000-yard seasons, like a ton of them. You know what I mean? Like nowadays, it's only a problem if it's a problem. You know what I mean? Yeah. Usually we know by now if it's a problem. Like if they say, "Oh yeah, there's like nerve," like Teddy Bridgewater's, for instance, they were like, "Oh yeah, he had nerve damage and it was ACL and MCL and he was laid up." Like I saw Odell like dunking a basketball the other day. Like he's probably going to be just fine. So,
how many fantasy points you get from that?
I mean, ask Devin Funchess.
I knew you were gonna go there,
dude. So I rewatched that video, and Devin Funchess gets so fired up, and he's like screaming at all these like random dudes. That video,
you need to send that to me. I haven't seen it.
I'm gonna send it because it's like at first I was like, "Oh, this," because I just saw the video of the dunk, but now if you watch the whole thing, he's clearly a little unhinged. So,
God,
maybe fade Devin Funchess a bit.
Not bad for the wide receiver 6 on Green Bay.
I was going to say, when's his induction ceremony into their Hall of Fame?
What's he a 42 long? You know his jacket size?
It's coming. Yeah, no, in that video, he looks pretty yoked. He's definitely bigger than 42.
I'm just gonna bookend kind of the Odell conversation with. He's 28. Like you guys brought that up. I actually had that as a point for him. I get the injury, but like for most wide receivers, like you're getting close to the prime of your career before you start to drop off in that 28 range. The dude's a stud. Like there are a lot of changes that we saw, I mean, especially going from the 2019 under oh my God, I can't remember his name, Hugh Jackson, under Hugh Jackson, and then going to it wasn't
the
Hugh
Kitchen.
Jackson, it was Freddie Kitchens. Holy shit. Right. So I don't know. In the Browns, we trust this year, even if it's the same refrain as last year, and I'm excited to see what they could do. I think putting him outside your 36 is a little over the top, but we had a whole conversation about Coop and where he is putting guys all the way up, and then even some of the guys back. You're just doing the same thing to say you're not going to touch him, so I completely get it.
He is my wide receiver 37, legitimately.
Okay, which I mean, it happens with any time you use these arbitrary cutoff points, and so that makes sense. It probably puts him in the same tier as a bunch of the late 30s guys. I'll throw this to you just as, again, one final point. Jerry Jeudy at 32 or Odell at 37? I'm assuming it's a tier, right? To Kevin.
You said what, Jeudy at 32?
Yeah, you have Jeudy at 32 or Odell at 37. Let's say that they're going to be a wide receiver 3 on your team. Who would you rather have?
Judy's going later than Odell back up in ADP. I'll take Jeudy all day long.
Okay.
So Gary, in looking at these rankings, I'm surprised that you didn't want to talk about CeeDee Lamb. And
It's because we've talked about him so much.
So much.
Yeah. I can tell you right now that if I brought up CeeDee Lamb, you would be referencing the fact that the Cowboys on 72% of their snaps bring only 2 wide receivers on, and that CeeDee Lamb was on there for like 47% while Gallup was also on there. But if next year that
you got it.
You're talking about it a lot, man. That's why I texted you guys. I was like, there are people on here. I'm not gonna.
We shouldn't
try and not bring up. Just we talked about it a lot. Not that I actually love the CeeDee Lamb conversation that we have. It's changed the way I think about wide receivers because I never really think about them in 2 wide sets and how that person gets an extra snap, and that happens frequently enough, right? Especially as we transition to more of like a pass on first down when we're going to pretend it's going to be rush and all that stuff. My game has changed from listening to you.
With all those guys, though, it's like you're basically placing a bet. You know what I mean? And those bets hit big when they hit, right? Yeah. Like Chris Godwin, when he moved into that chair, right? When Deshaun Jackson left and he moved into that chair where he was playing slot and then he was playing flanker, that if you bet on that, then you hit big. And with CeeDee Lamb, now there are rumors that Michael Gallup is learning the slot rule, which if they do that and it's going to be a little bit more even, if it's even just even between them, then it's kind of CeeDee to the moon. So it is a bet. That's a bet that I kind of do like. I might actually move him up in my rankings a little bit. I know we mentioned these rankings were a little old. I might actually boost him a little bit just because he does have that, that major upside.
I do have one question for you because it's so confusing to me. I apologize because I really wanted to cut off the wide receivers by then. You are the highest I have seen across the board for Devontae Parker. You're about wide receiver 31. Can you explain why that? I'm just going to take my shot and say, do you just think that you don't know who it's going to be Fuller for Waddle and you think they cannibalize each other? Therefore, you're going to go with Parker as one of the 2 that are going to be there in those 2 wide receiver sets?
Right. Well, that's exactly what it goes back to is that Devontae Parker, like people forget that he's a big boy. You know what I mean? Like, so I think he's going to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets regardless. And I think what they're basically doing is they're bringing in Will Fuller to play flanker and as insurance for their first round pick. If Will Fuller, best case scenario for that team is Will Fuller's amazing and Waddle's amazing, and then they just have their 3 wide receivers forever. Or maybe they even let Parker leave. But in that case, you don't really have a big guy to play that role. You know what I mean? So I think what basically you have is you bring in Will Fuller, Waddle can learn from Fuller, become that flanker, right? And then that's kind of the end result. Like this team is still kind of building, I think what happens is I don't think they're a team that can win it all this year, but if they figure out their situation next year, they take these supreme luxury picks, right? Like that's when you take the running back. That's when you take the corner, the cornerback, and you take like a pass rusher. Like that's, you go out and buy a pass, like a crazy pass rusher. You know what I mean? That's when all of a sudden this team is like, you're like, whoa, you know what I mean? But right now, I think they're a team that wins 9-10 games. They get to the playoffs and then they do what the Bills did. They go out and get the Stephon Diggs. I think that they're doing the right thing at wide receiver now, but there's still some pieces away where I think Parker is still just a guy that's entrenched in this offense and he's going to be out there every play. And when we've seen him healthy, he's been good. So, I'm not super scared of, his floor at all,
Yeah, and I could totally envision, and tell me if I'm off base on this, where we know Will Fuller's out for week 1 with this suspension. Yeah. Who's to say Waddle doesn't just completely blow up and then they have a decision to make? They're not tied to Fuller, past this year anyway. So that could be something where Will Fuller could find himself on the way up. But yeah, Parker is going to be there. And that's a guy that I do love taking, that he just falls way too far down. He falls farther than even like Curtis Samuel. And, I'm trying to think of other guys, but like Devonta Smith, even like he's getting taken with like Jalen Waddle. And that just seems really wild to me. The dude I think he's still a lock for at least 100 targets. The dude could easily find his way into 120 if things break right, with Tua, if he takes that next step. But yeah, Devontae Parker's ADP is just absurd right now.
Yeah. And the thing is, I probably shouldn't move them down in my rankings just in case people are taking them at face value and just kind of, which I kind of designed them that way where people can hopefully go in and kind of draft off them. But again, like, anyone using them should also be cognizant of ADP and know they don't have to take Parker at 31, but just know that I have that respect level for if you're looking for a safe play that you could start week 1 and start every week, then that's the kind of guy where you after that you start getting into these guys that are either slot guys that are kind of they don't really have the upside of actually being a wide receiver 1 or like even Juju, I'm like, I don't know,
Yeah.
So
I get it. So I wanted to do tight ends today, but that's not going to happen. I got a pretty sick kiddo, and probably need to go and figure out what's going on with that, so my wife doesn't end up killing me. I really appreciated going through all this stuff. Yeah, it went on longer than I intended to. So, Kevin, it turns out you are the better host because I have no idea what I am doing.
We are always.
Oh my God, you were a fan, Gary. You know what? You were a fantastic host. I don't want to. Don't no self slander here. This is not what we're about here. But
I want the Michael Jordan button. Why don't I have that button?
Stop it. Get some help.
I think if you click on, there are some here that I can actually access, like this one.
No, God, no.
We gotta add more of those. Those are great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to scour. That's gonna be my job now. To scour YouTube, and
I'll send them to you if I find any.
Yeah, please do.
Anyway.
We're gonna do that. We're gonna head on out of here. But make sure you guys are, like I said, youtube.com/lightning round. Subscribe to us. We that's how we feed our kids. I feed my kids off of this too. So all 0 kids that I have. But Gary's got some. Coop's got none. But
we're all feeding Gary's kids with this one. It's like,
I mean, I'm a big kid.
The Gary's Kid Foundation. Yeah, I think we're all kind of Gary's kids in a way. I like to think so.
Yeah. We just need to start a charity just called Gary's Kids.
Where the money goes to beer for me, Gary's kid. So
budget for more YouTube clips like the ones we just saw tonight.
Very expensive.
That's right. The rates fees we have to get to get those. I'm gonna get a cease and desist pretty soon. But all right, let's get on out of here. Like I said, go on Underdog Fantasy. Use the code Lightning for $25 off. That is a Best Ball Mania for free, where you can win $1,000,001.
And let me just say before we go that if anyone does like my rankings, does like the philosophy, they're available via the FF newsletter Patreon. So that's run by our buddy Will. If you just go to at Twitter FF newsletter. The newsletter is amazing. If you want to support the newsletter, the rankings come along with that. You get access to our Discord. It's a lot of fun. So John Gary's in there now.
That's awesome.
Kev supposedly might be in there at some point. I don't know. He's kind of a big
lurking.
Shot, so. Yeah, he's taking some peeks. But yeah, so we have a good time. It's a good community. So check it out.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen. I'm Kevin Tompkins for Gary Haddow for Andrew Cooper. Have a great night, and we will see you next week.